Hey guys, I'm Nick and welcome back to the channel. Or if you happen to be a new viewer here or just a regular viewer that hasn't subscribed yet, please go ahead and click on that subscribe button to stay up to date with all the latest Star Trek news on YouTube. You know you want to. So today we're talking about episode 5, Star Trek Discovery, season 4, entitled The Examples. I quite enjoyed this episode. Reminded me of Star Trek episodes of old. We had the rescue of the prisoners from the Akali planet. We've got the sort of up himself scientist butting heads with Stamets and Saru on board the Discovery. We've got the return of a few characters that haven't really got that much screen time lately. Reese got something to do. We got to see Reno again. It was great. We got to see prison break sequence from this planet, and we got to learn a bit more about the DMA and what is behind it. So let's take a look through this week's episode and see what it was all about. So the episode starts off with a bunch of Federation starships and they're sort of scanning the DMA, and we get to hear a little bit of a homage to past Star Trek characters, the USS Janeway and also the Vulcan ship, the T'Pau, obviously referencing Catherine Janeway and T'Pau, one of the Vulcan leaders that we saw way back in original series. So it's nice when we get little nods, from ship names to characters we remember from the past. We've obviously had other names such as the USS Nog and obviously the Voyager J and all the. It's good when they use starship names that hark back to previous characters and things we're familiar with. And before long, we realise that the DMA is moving location, it's disappearing, it's reappearing. We kind of get a sense that there is some form of intelligence behind it, or it's been created. Specifically, it's not a naturally occurring phenomenon. And this is a pose for concern. It's no longer some, benign galactic phenomenon that just happens to be putting people at risk by nature. It's actually a created object with some form of intelligent control that is moving it around, which is a concern. Early on in the episode, we get Admiral Vance speculating about who might be behind the DMA. And we get a bunch of old Star Trek races listed. The Iconians, which we saw back in Next Generation, which were a very advanced race. We've got the Metrons, we've got the Q Continuum. We've even got the Nicene, which were the race behind the Caretaker Array that swept the Voyager to the Delta Quadrant. Lots of names dropped here from past Star Trek races of immense power. I must say, I do like it when they do drop these little references and so forth and little in-jokes back to past Star Trek episodes. I think anything they can do to tie all of the series together in this way, I think works really well. It gives the fans a bit of, fan service and also gives us a bit of history as to what's been going on. Like, for example, that the Q Continuum hasn't been in touch with the Federation for the last 600 years. Little bits of information like that are quite kind of curious to know. And before long, we get to meet Ruon Tarka, who is the Federation science expert who's been working with Aurelio, who's we obviously remember from last season. So it's good we get Aurelio's name dropped again. He obviously is a very expert scientist as well. And Ruon Tarka is played by Sean Doyle, who you guys would remember, who was Ehrenreich from The Expanse. So yeah, good actor, good sci-fi pedigree actor in this role. He's been in a bunch of stuff, and I think he did a good job in this part. We also get to know that the prison colony, which is on a bunch of asteroids, is run by the Akali, which we saw way back in Star Trek Enterprise in the episode Civilization. Again, good to have a link back to a previous Star Trek episode in terms of a species we're familiar with. I don't like it when they just suddenly start creating, new races that we've never heard of before. It's like, there's so many races in Star Trek, let's get a bit of history back again. So I'm glad that they've chosen a previous race we've used before in Star Trek Enterprise. The other thing I quite liked about this episode is some characters we haven't kind of seen do much in a while got a bit of screen time, which is great, fantastic. I loved the fact that, even though we didn't see him a great deal, I loved the fact that Reese got to head up the evacuation of the Akali. He obviously had a big responsibility doing that. We didn't see what he was doing, but he popped in and he made a few comments on the comms and everything. So at least he's getting a bit of responsibility. We got to see Nilsson a bit more on the bridge. We got to see Reno, who hadn't been back for a while. I think that's great. I think there's far too many bridge officers on Discovery that just don't get enough screen time. Meanwhile, that being said, Detmer and Owo were nowhere to be seen. We got some snail-faced alien at the ops console, and I don't know where Detmer and Owo were, but they obviously had the day off. We haven't seen these guys on the show for a while. Obviously, obviously the last few episodes, we haven't really had much action with the bridge crew at all, and they weren't here for this, which I thought was a little bit odd. The characters get so few amount of screen time as it is, we can't take any more away from them, surely. But we did. Meanwhile, down on the planet, we had Book and Burnham taking charge of the releasing of the prisoners of the prison planet had been abandoned. They're evacuating all of the law-abiding citizens, and they just left the criminals behind. And they weren't really that bad at criminals, apart from maybe one guy who murdered somebody, but the rest of just were kind of like the guy who stole a loaf of bread kind of situation. And they didn't really deserve necessarily to get the harsh sentence that they did, but their colony was operating under past Emerald Chain law, so they kind of had to abide by it. We got a little bit of those ethics debates in terms of, you know, who do you save? It's, the good versus the good of the many versus the good of the few kind of debate. So we got to, rescue these criminals. Well, they were criminals, but their sentence was overly harsh. So I think that was a little good dynamic, I think, which harks back to a lot of past Star Trek episodes where we examine that whole many versus few debate. So it did feel a lot like a Star Trek episode in this episode. And it's been, I think, one of the better episodes this season so far. We obviously got a good scene with Culber and Kovich, where Kovich completely psychoanalyzed Culber in about 30 seconds and pretty much nailed everything, dealing with his whole issues and drama about dying and then coming back to life, and how he's now got a saviour complex to save everybody because he was brought back for a reason, and if otherwise, what's the whole point in living? And yeah, I thought Kovich did a pretty apt job of summing up what Culber's got going on, even though maybe Culber was a bit resentful about hearing it. I love the dynamic in engineering where we got the whole Reno with Stamets, which obviously is always a fun dynamic, but this time we had Ruan Taka in the mix. He's even on another level altogether, where he's kind of just so full of himself and just, he's happy to blow up the entire galaxy if it solves his scientific puzzle. So he's a bit reckless. He's obviously very smart, but he kind of puts a lot of people in danger just to answer a few, scientific questions. So I did enjoy this whole dynamic between the Stamets and Taka and Reno kind of situation where they're all trying to get the scientific stuff done, energized about the test DMA they're doing in the lab, but Saru is play it by the rules, play it a bit safer. So it was a nice counterpoint. We have the calmness of Saru intersposed with the chaos that Taka brought to the ship, and that kind of played out as well in the whole yelling in each other's face dynamic with obviously Taka screaming in Saru's face and daring Saru to do the same. And fun that Ruan Taka was from Risa. We hadn't sort of really had any characters from Risa apart from when we actually visit Risa, and we've got scantily clad girls in bikinis and whatnot. So you sort of don't think about people actually coming from Risa who work in any kind of field apart from hospitality. Obviously, in this particular case, they've produced a fairly brainy scientist. Some of the dynamics on the asteroid with Book and Burnham freeing the prisoners from their cells with the whole bug bombs with the spinning saw blades that would turn beetles into saw blades, and then reprogramming them so they can blow open the door and everything. It was fun. It didn't pose that much of a challenge. Burnham just taps on the console a few times and she can reprogram anything and twist anything to her will. So there wasn't really that many impediments that really had them in a pickle. They kind of just phasered the power thing to get them out of the cells, and then they reprogrammed the bugs to blow open the door. Might have, I think, been more exciting if they had have been up against a couple more obstacles that posed a bit more of a threat, perhaps, that they had to kind of overcome. Not quite so easily, but I guess we were competing with a lot of other dynamics going on with the guys on board the ship creating the simulated DMA. Stuff with Kovich and Culber. So I guess we had to kind of rush them through their part of the storyline relatively quickly. I enjoyed the scenes between Stamets and Culber. There's some cool parallels going on in this show, in this season, with the DMA, which, let's face it, the DMA equals the COVID pandemic. Obviously, everybody's massively stressed, people needing to see counselling because obviously people are worried what's going to happen to them and all this sort of thing. So there's a lot of parallels, I think, there between the worry of the pandemic we're currently in, to the whole DMA situation. Star Trek, I think, is always kind of doing its better work when it's holding up a mirror to society. And it seems like at the end of this episode, we got a little bit more of a hint to Ruan Taka's backstory and maybe why he's particularly smart. At the end of the episode, he felt a scar at the back of his neck. I wonder whether this scar implied that he was in fact a former Borg drone, perhaps. Maybe the reason he's so clever is the fact that he has the knowledge of many, many species, much like Seven of Nine is incredibly smart scientifically. She's got a lot of big science brain on her shoulders because she has the experience of all her knowledge having been part of the Borg collective, and she's retained a lot of that knowledge. So I wonder whether Ruan Taka is a former Borg drone who's been, you know, freed from the Borg collective at some point in the past as well. All in all, I really enjoyed this episode. I thought it was one of the better ones this season so far. Had some interesting stuff on the asteroid with Bystam and Borg. We got some cool, you know, humour with Reno and Stamets and Taka in the science lab on board the Discovery, creating the simulated DMA. We got a little bit of humour. We got other bridge members who haven't had much screen time before, like Reese and Nilsson getting a little bit of things to do on the show. So yeah, it was a good episode. I thought I enjoyed it. Guys, let me know what you thought about this episode, what your opinion was. What do you think about Ruan Taka? Do you think he's an ex-Borg drone? Do you think this scar on the back of his neck means something completely different? Leave your thoughts and theories in the comment section. Guys, and as always, please leave a super thanks if you're able to. It really helps the channel out. If not, like, comment, share and subscribe if you haven't already done so, and check out my merch store where you can pick up some really cool Star Trek t-shirts, hoodies, caps, mugs, all that sort of stuff. Great designs in there, always coming up with some new ones. And I'll be back very soon for my next video. I'll see you guys soon.